You're watching Good on Paper, a bookish channel.
Hi everybody,
Hi guys.
we're back and today we're talking about one of our favorite subjects, which is YA books, also known as young adult books. Basically the books that we grew up reading as teenagers, and so we're going to talk about our favorites. We might even get a little bit into YA books today, how they're different, whether we like them, whether we would give them to our daughters to read, our future daughters, whether we would give them to our future daughters to read or not, just all those kind of thoughts.
Yeah. As we're talking, even as we're doing this intro, other books are coming to my mind. I'm like, oh, that book that I read when I was 14.
Yes. I just feel like after you grow up, reading is not the same. I don't know, maybe it's because you're less stressed out as a kid and you can relax and enjoy it more. But I just miss those days.
I do too. I feel like, especially because as an adult being on Bookstagram now too, you read so much about what is popular because you're seeing people talk about it all the time versus when I was in school, I just went to the library and just picked up whatever book, I didn't know what was popular. It was just what sounded interesting.
I think I read the full YA section of every single library because I grew up moving around, so I probably went to I had 2 to 3 different locations when I was a teenager. Actually, maybe only 2. And I know I read through the full YA section.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Same. I would get a stack of 15 books and take them, and I would read all of them.
Yeah. And then some of them, my favorites, I would check out and reread. Some of them I was like, oh, that was awful.
Yeah, there were some where I was like, is this the right section for this book? Because I'm fairly certain this is the wrong section for this book.
Yeah. I stumbled across maybe 2 that as a teenager I was like, ooh, I did not want to read that.
Yeah.
And that was back then. I don't even want to know what's in there now.
No. There's a reason that when I go to the library, it's usually for reference books now. Because I get kind of scared to accidentally find things I didn't want to find, honestly.
So what was your favorite or one of your favorite books from when you were a teenager? When you think back, what you just remember the most?
Honestly, the most defining series of my teenage years easily would have to be The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini.
Yeah.
The Airport book. Yeah. I mean, I read the first 2, I think, pretty quickly together, and then I had to wait for the 3rd one. And I had to wait forever for the 4th one. And I remember buying the 4th one. We went to 3 different stores till we found it because I was determined to get it the day of. And I remember reading them in high school, and I read them 3 different times. Those were life-changing for me. Because they were the first, I think, really epic fantasies I'd ever read.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody I knew was reading them. They were such a big deal. Yeah, those were definitely a big deal.
I didn't get into them so much, and I think it was because I read them when I was 12. And they were just really big, as a 12-year-old. So I know I read the 2nd one. I probably read the 3rd one. I don't know that I ever read the 4th one. Because I think by the time one came out, when did that come out? Because we're the same age, so.
I think I was a senior, so it must have been 2013 or something like that.
Yeah, so I think by the time it came out, I was like, I don't want to reread them again to read the 4th one. Because I think I just wasn't interested in big epic fantasy. And I think the thing for me, and I've always kind of been this way, is it's written by a guy, and I just never connect as much. I wanted to read books about girls and girly things, and it's very epic fantasy, like you said. And I think I like that kind of stuff, but it wasn't my favorite. I was reading more girly kind of books. So I think by the time the 4th one came out, I didn't care enough to read it, but now I think that's probably a good thing. Now I'm older, now I can just start at the beginning and read all 4 of them and really enjoy them.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, because at the time, I had started out reading Puck Everlasting in 5th grade, and so I was fantasy romance was my jam, and it was usually standalones, and then I don't remember how I came across Aragon. I think it might have been recommended to me by somebody at school, and I read the first one, and I remember thinking that it took forever to get going. The first book was so slow, and it was 100 pages in before you really cared about what was happening. So I was like, okay, this is boring. But I remember reading it in class, and I remember when I was in middle school, I usually was the kind of person who would do my homework in advance, and like I would be done with everything in class, and so I'd just be sitting there, and everybody else would get in trouble for texting, but I would have my book below my desk, and the teacher would be like, Rachel, are you texting? And I would fill in the book, and it would be like, just give me like this thing guy, and I'm like, what? I'm just reading. And everybody thought,
teachers always try to get you to read more, so what can they say?
But the thing was, everybody assumed that you had to be smart to read big books like that, and I was like, my grades do not translate to me reading big books, guys. They don't mean the same thing. But yeah, they are.
Did you, like, as a teenager or, like, a kid, had you already read Lord of the Rings or seen the movies at that point?
No, we read The Hobbit in 8th grade, which I liked, but The Hobbit is significantly smaller. And we watched the 3rd Lord of the Rings movie because at the time The Hobbit hadn't been made yet.
Okay.
And I hadn't seen the movies. So the Lord of the Rings movie, so that weekend my friends and I watched the first 2 so that when we watched the 3rd one in class I would understand what was happening. But I didn't read the books until I was an adult.
Okay, because I'm thinking maybe if you had already liked the Lord of the Rings, that's probably had a lot to do with why you liked Aragon so much, and I didn't, because I knew nothing about, I knew of the Lord of the Rings, never seen the movies or, like, anything, so I think, for me, it was, like, I wasn't, like, already in love with, like, that kind of fantasy, I guess.
I think it was kind of almost a, like, kind of a stamina kind of thing, like, I started the first book and I wanted to know what happened, and so I just kept reading, and I think, too, I'm a romantic through and through, and the romance is my favorite part. And so, for anybody who's read the Aragon series, the Inheritance Cycle, there's a little sliver enough to keep you wondering if it's going to turn into full romance. That was part of the thing for me, was I wanted to keep reading to find out how much romance would eventually be in the book. And I was like waiting for more and more. So that was probably the biggest series for me, though.
Honestly, I think the romance is the only thing I remember from that book. What was her name? Was like Ari? No.
Yeah.
Arya. Arya. Okay, I was like, wait, no, I'm thinking of Game of Thrones, but I guess they had the same thing. Yeah. Arya.
Was the southern ever.
It was. It really was.
It was brutal. I mean, my teenage self was like, come on, just kiss already.
I think I might have actually been a little creeped out because she was so many years older.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when I was 12, I was like, this is kind of weird.
That's fair. I mean, I guess it's the same thing with, like, Edward and Bella. Like, technically, he's a lot older.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was because it was the girl. For some reason, I guess even at 12, I didn't like male-female age gap for the girls older. At 12, I must have not liked that. I don't think that's fair.
That's not my favorite thing.
Yeah. But I feel like Aragon did it really well. Because it made it an interesting, like, roadblock for them. You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely an interesting dynamic in a relationship.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as the books went on, you got to see him mature from, like, a 15-year-old boy to acting to her maturity level eventually.
Yeah.
What would be, like, the most defining YA book for you that you remember most as a kid or young adult?
I remember the Tamora Pierce series a lot. So she wrote The Lioness Quartet. It was like about a girl who became a knight named Alana. And then she wrote all these other books. I remember that a lot. I kind of wish I hadn't read it, because there were no, like, descriptive sex scenes, but, like, in it, there were, like, the characters were teenagers. Like, it had, like, kind of fade to black. And that was very fun. I was, like, 12 when I read Alana, and then I was 14 when I read, like, her other series. And, back then I was like, oh, I'm so cool and grown up, and I'm reading all this stuff. But I was like, I wish I hadn't read that, because I think that definitely influenced my mind in not very good ways. Yeah. So I remember those a lot, even though now I'm like, I wish I could remember them. But I also really remember Shannon Hale.
Yes.
The Princess Academy.
Yeah.
So much. Oh my goodness. Those books were so good.
So good. I reread that one a couple of times.
Yeah, me too. And then I remember I started writing something and it was very clear that I had been reading Princess Academy. It was so similar.
Yeah. That's awesome.
We should just start naming off books that we read.
Yeah.
I remember reading Twilight. I blew through those books.
How old were you when you read them?
I was 14.
Okay.
Who are you?
Well, see, you gotta understand, back when I was a teenager and a young adult, my parents were like much more strict than they are now, and my mom, like, we couldn't watch Harry Potter because Harry Potter was crap, and like, they got rid of the Hercules VHS movie because it had Greek gods. So, they heard somebody at church talk about it and being like, oh, we have to do it. Now I'm like, Mom, why did you do that? She's like, I don't know. She goes, somebody told me I should, so I did. So they were like super strict for a while, and my mom still to this day doesn't like the idea of vampires. It really disturbs her. She just doesn't like it at all. And so in high school when they were coming out, the Twilight series, like my friends were all reading them and obsessed with them. I wasn't allowed to read them because my mom thought they were like really dark and evil and stuff. And so I didn't read them until I was like probably 19 or 20.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was quite a bit older.
I'm honestly surprised I was allowed to read them, but I think it was because one of my good friends who I was in Girl Scouts with and her mom, my mom was really good friends with them. They were both reading them, like mother-daughter, and they're obsessed with it. So I think my mom was like, well, like, if they're reading it. But, I don't know, like, especially at 14, those books were intense. They really were.
Yeah. I mean, I liked them once I eventually read them.
Yeah, I did too, and I honestly didn't think, just because I feel like I'm happier that I read Twilight versus, more Pierce, because I thought that Edward's character, I don't know, maybe I have to reread it, because I'm probably going to say this, and if I reread it now, I would probably totally disagree with it. But at the time, I thought Edward's character was just really sweet and, chivalrous. Yeah. And I liked that book made it a point that Edward wanted to wait for marriage, because I feel like that's not something that, like, men and, like, fictional men are kind of, like, have that standard in fiction anymore. I mean, you never read about that because, there's Meg Cabot and the boyfriend's always pressuring and this and that. So I thought it was really nice that he was leading that. So I honestly, again, I'm saying this, I haven't read them in a long time, but given my memories, I don't really think they're that bad for a young girl to read, but there's other aspects of them. But I really appreciate it. Like, I remember being young and just feeling like kind of like safe with that aspect. Like, I didn't feel like freaked out or weirded out by it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, a little, I've read them.
But they were married, so.
Well, and it's not at all a descriptive. Like, it's Fade to Black, and even the Fade to Black isn't super detailed. It's basically just them making out, and then you assume that they have. Like, it's not graphic at all. I mean, it might be like just a tad bit spicier than I would normally read, but barely. But
it was a little violent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that is maybe not the best thing for a young girl, but I think by the time that book came out, I might have been a little older. But even still.
Yeah. So. I mean, I would say, like, later high school, I would probably let my daughter read it. Like, 17, 18 or so. And I mean, I read them about once a year now, because I find them, like, a comfort read for me now. And I would say that first, in Twilight, Edward ticks me off a little sometimes, because I'm like, I get that you're concerned, but you're kind of being a jerk about it. Can you calm down? And then in the beginning of Eclipse, there's like 3 or 4 chapters that I just completely skip over and I don't read them, because if I read them, I'll throw the book across the room because I get so mad at Edward. And I'm like, Edward, I understand that you love Bella, but you cannot be an idiot about it. And same with Jacob. I'm like, you guys are having like a pissing contest and you need to calm down. You're acting like children. It makes me so mad. But I will say that through the rest of Eclipse into Breaking Dawn, because people talk about Edward and Bella's like toxic relationship and stuff, I'm like, I actually think their relationship ends up in a very healthy place. Like, I like them by the end of the series. I don't have a problem with them at all.
But I don't remember them being like that bad. I mean, obviously they're like a little on the edge, but
Yeah.
Out of all the books out there, I really don't think they're that bad.
No, I don't either. Yeah. And that was a good series back in the day. I also remember The Mortal Instruments.
I think
Hendrix there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's the series I read. I read one of the series. It must have been that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are so good. I don't remember much about them, but I remember really loving them when I read them.
I think there's 5 of them. I know it's been a long time since I read them. Yeah. I do remember that there was and I mean, I guess this is kind of unfortunately pretty standard for YA, where there was fade to black sex scenes.
Yeah.
In the later books, but I did read those ones.
Did you ever read The Host by Stephanie Meyer? Because she wrote Twilight and she read The Host.
Yeah. No, I can't remember why I didn't read it. I watched the movie.
It's so good. That one is my favorite. I read that. So we were in England at the time, and we lived an hour away from London, so south. And then we took the train to Scotland, and so it was a 7-hour train ride. And I finished the entire Host book on that train ride. I could not stop reading. Just the world building is so good, and then it has a love triangle in it that I adore. I love that. It's so good.
I'll have to try that. I don't know how accurate the movie is to the book, but I liked the movie just fine.
I actually really liked the movie, which is surprising for me, loving the book so much. You would think I would hate the movie, but I thought the movie was so good, and the actors who played the guys, I thought they were perfect. I just loved it.
Yeah. I thought they did really, the actress was really good, having, kind of almost 2 separate love stories happen at the same time. I was really impressed with that. I was like, okay, all right, I see you.
I think, let's see, what else did I read? I read a lot of Meg Cabot, the Princess Diaries and her other series, but I started to get annoyed with them because they would start off good. I think we talked about this before. They would start off good, and by the mid-book in the series, it would just end up into the girl is trying to decide whether she should have sex with him. And just for me at that age, I didn't relate to that at all. I didn't have a boyfriend, and even if I did, it was just so foreign to me. That wasn't part of my world, which I'm glad, but I just got really annoyed with them.
When you think about it, this I guess is kind of a tangent, but when you think about it, your prefrontal cortex is not developed until you're 26, which means that your long-term decision making isn't really developed until you're 26. Which means that as a teenager, your brain isn't really wired for you to make decisions with big consequences like having sex. So it doesn't really make sense for it to be a topic that's so discussed all the time. It's that's not really a topic that you should be dealing with when your brain is so underdeveloped still, at the age of 15,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I wasn't even thinking that at all. So I'm reading these books and I'm what is even happening? This is boring.
Yeah. That reminds me of the Vampire Academy?
I never read those.
The movie came out, I can't remember how long the movie came out, and I read the book to see how accurate it was to the movie, 3 or 4 years ago. So I was an adult, but still, I think it's YA. And I think there's 5 books, and I read the first 3, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, whatever one is in Russia, I read that one, and then I stopped because I got annoyed because at the end of every book would be this really big cliffhanger to keep you going, and then the story would completely twist around and be this big oh, we have to go do this thing now. And I'm oh my gosh, can't we just wrap this up? And then of course the guy and the girl were never happy together until the end of the book, but that was one of the things, was whether or not to have sex was a big topic throughout the series. And I was I have no concept of this right now. Yeah. I mean, even at 3 or 4 years ago, it's I'm not really dealing with this at the moment because as a single woman, it wasn't really a problem for me at the time. But yeah, that would definitely not be a series that I would let a young adult read, because not only was it a constant discussion, there were a lot of fade to black scenes that were to make out for pretty hot and heavy.
Yeah. I remember it, wasn't that the one that it just like had a ton of books, and like you know how like there's some series where it's just like kind of like the Magic Treehouse books. It's just like really like just keep pumping them out like really fast, giving them the best quality. Because I remember that series, and that's what it always seemed like to me. So I was like, oh, this is gonna be bad. Like as a teenager, I was like, these books look like they're not gonna be good, and I was right.
It's a shame because like I have no problem with reading vampire books. I tend to enjoy them most of the time, and I really like the main character Rose. Like I feel like the author had something really good going with that main character because she was so fun and snarky and entertaining. But then the stories just kept getting more. I guess it's in my. I guess it's something how you feel about these movies, like Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where they started out really strong and then they just got more and more dramatic and kind of ridiculous as they went on. And that's how I feel about these books, where it's like they just kept doing that, and I'm like, okay, but I'm bowing out. I'm tired of this. Yeah.
There's a lot of books and series that like need to end.
Yeah.
Like they just start getting silly eventually.
Yeah.
Did you read The Hunger Games?
Yes. Yeah.
That was definitely like a big one. I remember those books. Like everybody was reading them.
Yeah. They were huge. And I'm not a big dystopian fan myself, but everybody was reading them, so I was like, I wanted to. But this just shows you what kind of child I was as a teenager. I think I was like 16, and I told my mom about the book. But you know, the concept is that these kids are going into this arena to kill each other. Yeah. And so I was like, I don't know if it's appropriate or not. And my mom was like, well, how about I read it first, and so that I know if it's appropriate for you. So she read it first, and she was like hooked. She read the whole trilogy. And she was like, it's not inappropriate. It's just kind of disturbing, slightly, like the concept of it. So she finished all three, and then I think I just read the first one, and then I was just, whatever, and then I was done. Yeah. And then I did finish the trilogy later, like when I was like 20 or something. And I've never reread it. It's not a series that I've ever wanted to read. Yeah.
I like them, but I was definitely not obsessed with them. Like there's other books. The reason they stick out to me is because they're so popular, and I do remember reading them. I remember seeing the movie, but yeah, they weren't like my favorite books. I mean, it's not like a dystopian type person, which is, I think I'm just picky with dystopian, maybe. Because like I'm reading a dystopian right now, and I like it, but
yeah. I think too because they were so like emotionally dramatic. Like there was so much like trauma throughout the entire series that it kind of got heavy and tiresome to read after a while. I mean, I tend to like my reads just a little bit on the lighter side, so I think that was the thing that I didn't love about it. Not that it's bad; it's just wasn't for me. Where I was like, okay,
yeah. Did you read the Maximum Ride book? They were, I can't remember the author, but they're about like these kids that were born with like wings. Okay. And so they're like locked up in some lab, I think, and then they escape. But it's basically like, so they have wings, and so it's kind of dystopian, and it's like band of teenagers kind of thing. I think they have younger kids, so it's like the found family trope a little bit. But I remember I was so obsessed with those books. I love them, and like the romance in it. That was the first time like I think I really enjoyed romance because it was very mild. It was just like the guy that she liked, like they knew they liked each other, and like one time he touched her hand. And I just remember, like, I got shivers. I was like, oh, this is so exciting. You know? And I just really, it's one of those book series that has, like, a fond memory in my heart. Because I was a young teenager. I was, like, maybe 13 or 14. So this was, like, kind of, like, my first experience with, like, reading romance and, like, being, like, old enough to, like, relate to it. And it's exciting for me. Yeah, I love those books. I want to say it was, like, Haddix, like Margaret Peterson Haddix, but it might have been a male author. Okay. Actually, I think it was a male author. I don't know. But we can put I'll look up like the books and like all their authors later. I mean,
I don't know. The first romance series that I ever read that I think really, like I liked Touch Everlasting. It got me into it. But like the first romance series that I read where it was like the actual romances, and I was really excited about it. And I don't know if anybody has read these. But it's the Frog Prince. Or the Princess Edie Baker.
Edie Baker, yes!
I was just about that.
I love those. Those are really good.
I emailed the author, and I was like 14, and I sent her a picture of myself, and I was like, if you ever make a movie, I think I would be a really good lead.
That's so
It's so funny looking back at it now. Which I think the character had auburn hair, so I could actually do it now. But I don't look anymore. But those are the first ones that I love this book. Love this book.
They never use actual 16-year-olds. Like, you can play it. You can still do it.
You guys make a live action. Call me. Oh, somebody. Yeah, I love it. I don't remember how I found them.
I found them at the library, and I actually think I was 9 when I started reading them. But I think I reread them when I was older. Did you ever read the Once Upon a Marigold books?
Yes.
That kind of stuff.
I did.
Yeah, those are stuff.
That was another one where I was like, probably nobody knows who Catholic is. Yeah. I don't remember it very well, but I know I read it.
Yeah. Those books were so good. And then, like, the Gail Carson Levine books. I mean, those I started reading younger, but I still really liked them when I was a teenager. Like, Ella Enchanted and Ferris and I don't know if you like those.
I've read
They're like cool. Yeah. It's like a fairy tale retelling. She does like a bunch of fairy tale retelling. Even back in the day, those were my favorite. Mm-hmm. They still are my favorite. I mean, I haven't changed.
I feel like those light, fun romances were always my favorite thing to read. Still are, really.
Yeah. I remember I really liked one. It was called Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. And her adult series is like my absolute to die for series now. But back then, I had only read this one. And it was a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, but it was set in like Poland. So like the characters all had like Slavic names. And I just remember I loved that book. It was so good. And I really liked, did you ever read Summers at Castle Auburn?
I think so.
It's kind of a more obscure book. I can't even remember the author, but it was kind of the same genre I like now. It was fantasy, but like more romance and very like female like focused. Yeah. I feel like you would really like it if you read it. Yeah. It's just I read it over and over.
I love those books. There used to be a bookstore, it was called Lucy online, and it was like you could get books for like $2, and I would get boxes of books at Christmas for my birthday every year. Oh, I love that. So I still have all the Edie Baker books, paperback books in my storage unit and stuff, and all of my Shannon Hale books. I still have all those too.
So do you read a lot of YA books today, or because I know you mostly read indie books on Kindle Unlimited. Yeah, Kindle Unlimited, which I feel like a lot of those are YA, but maybe some of them are just like teen adults too.
I think, and I feel like indie books aren't marketed usually as clearly, whether or not they're YA or adult. Yeah. So sometimes I'm like, I don't really know. I think K.M. Shea's books are all technically marketed for YA. And every once in a while when I'm reading them, I can kind of tell, but for the most part, to me, they just feel like clean adult books. I'm trying to think who else. I think most authors that I read, like Melanie Sellier, maybe how you say her name, or W.R. Daniel, like I think all of those are technically all YA, like written for YA, but they just feel like clean adult to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like YA and clean adult are so similar, and I've always thought, like, as I got older, I was like, you know what, I just want to write books that any woman 13 and up, you know what I mean? I was like, why does there have to be such a big difference between, like, a young woman, like, in her teens, and, like, an older woman? Like, why do we have to make it depressing and dark and all that stuff? So I was always like, I want to write books that, like, if you're 13 and you're female or older than that, you're probably going to like it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just the way I feel.
Yeah. There's actually, and this is kind of off topic, but whatever. We like it when we get off topic. I've been rereading books that I own lately, and the book, and like I pick out a color and I picked out Wolfskin by W.R. Daniel. I don't know if you've heard of that one or not.
I think that's on my TBR. It sounds super familiar, but I haven't read it.
I thought of you when I started reading it. Like, I've read it before and liked it, but I was reading it and I was like, this reminds me, I don't know why, but this reminds me so much of Jennie. Like, the main character is this young, like, 14 or 15-year-old girl. It's a Red Riding Hood retelling, and it's, like, kind of got this very folksy way of storytelling that feels like a story that's been told down from mother to daughter for years kind of thing. And it's super sweet. And anyway, I don't know why that one reminds me of you so much, but it does. And I was like,
okay, now I need to read it.
Yeah.
Like, it's on my TBR. It needs to get bumped up.
But yeah, I know, like you were saying, it is, I think it's YA, but it, to me, feels like clean adult / YA. Sometimes YA feels really young, like the characters feel really immature. But then I feel like a lot of the time it just feels like a clean adult book.
Yeah. And see, even when I was a teenager, because sometimes the thing with YA, I feel like it's either too adult or like too dumbed down. I feel like that's why I like books that could be either YA or like clean adult, because I feel like teenagers, should be able to read books that are dealing with like more adult themes, but are just like not dragging you down kind of thing, like uplifting, but like more adult themes. And I think that's why I like the idea of having books that like a young woman could read and an older woman could read. Because, once you hit your teenage years, you come into your physical adult maturity at least. So, you're starting to think about like romance and marriage and stuff like that. And so that's why I appreciate books that deal with like romance and marriage and coming into being an adult, but just like in an uplifting, like inspirational way that's not full of like stuff that you don't want to be reading about, basically.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like that's the goal. I think that's why I don't like to call it YA when I write books, because I want it to be accessible or desirable to pretty much any woman.
Yeah.
Period,
Yeah, and I understand like the whole thing about teenagers are more emotional and they make dumb decisions, but I think a lot of that is because like people don't hold them to a standard. And that's why I never really liked the whole like really young like teenager book where they do like all these stupid things, and it's just like, to me, I'm like, then you're setting the bar for young people as like, oh, this is how I should be, because this is what teenagers are. Because the concept of teenagers is such a new concept. Like back in the past, they were young adults.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And people might say, oh, well, but their brains and their hormones and this and that and the other thing. I still think there's something to be said for like expecting a certain standard. Yeah. Like you can bypass your hormones and how your brain is like a little bit more if somebody holds you to a higher standard. Like if it's going to be harder because you're young and you're dealing with all this stuff. But like I think people sell teenagers short on what they should be able to achieve and how they should be able to act and all that stuff. I really do.
I agree. I mean, I always think of when I'm reading books about kids or teenagers, I think about when I was teaching third grade, and those 8-year-olds, like the conversations we had didn't feel always like it was an 8-year-old. Like they understand a lot, and they're actually really smart, and they understand like the social nuances and stuff. Like they're not stupid, and I think that they respond more like adults, and we treat them like adults. Like for teenagers, like they can, they don't have to do the stupid, really obviously dumb mistakes in the book all the time.
Yeah. So, what were we talking about? We really got off on a tangent. It's still related. I know, isn't it? Reading YA now. Yeah, so you read like kind of like teen adult YA. Sometimes it's a little blurry. But I've been reading a lot of like strictly YA lately. I don't know why. I think because it's like the first section when I walk into the library, so I just see it and I start reading. And I think a lot of people I know on Instagram read a lot of YA. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, there's that book that somebody was talking about. And right now I've been reading a lot of like the Enclave, the Enclave publishing house. And I think I don't know if they're all YA, but some of them definitely are. So it's like science fiction and science fiction and fantasy. So I think they call it like speculative fiction or something like that. So right now I'm reading The Wonderland Trials by Sarah Ella, and it's so good. Like, it kind of reminds me of like Hairball. It's like, I'm like, I didn't expect to like another book as much as Hairball. And it also reminds me a little bit of Harry Potter. And it's just like has a really good world building because it's taking off of like Alice in Wonderland, but it's also kind of dystopian. And it just has really good like Christian, like kind of, I don't want to say allegory, but maybe it is allegory.
Yeah.
And I'm just really enjoying it, like, so much.
Yeah.
You know, I picked it up. I was like, oh, I might not like it, but I was like, wow, I really like this book.
Well, especially when Bookstagram tells you something is good, I'm always like, is it though? So it's nice when you're like, okay, no, that's not.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that. And then I just finished Endlewood, which I feel like it's YA. I don't know if that's how Alyssa, the author is Alyssa Savianos. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry, Alyssa, if I didn't. But I just finished that one, and it was so good. Like, it was a book like I finished, and I was like, I'm so excited to let my teenage daughters read this book because it was really good and so sweet. It's kind of like Howl's Moving Castle and like kind of like Lord of the Rings inspired. Like, it wasn't like Lord of the Rings, but it was just like Lord of the Rings, but it was a cozy fantasy kind of thing. Yeah.
I like.
That was good. Yeah, so I've been reading a lot of YA lately, like so much YA. I think like all the books on my nightstand right now are all YA, and I don't know how I got here, but
so you're like the expert on YA today. So then, in your opinion, does YA today feel the same as YA when you were a teenager?
Some of it, yes. Actually, not really. No, and I'll say because the ones I've been reading lately, like the Enclave books. And like Alyssa's book, which is indie published, those books are the books I wish I had had. That I don't think they were publishing. They're a lot like, because when I was growing up as a child, everything was like magic, adventure, and like a good moral and like cozy. And then when I became a teenager, I felt like I couldn't find that. Yeah. So I do think there are a lot more like indie publishers and small publishers publishing that I wish I could have had. And then the traditionally published YA feels very different. Like, it just, I don't know if it's darker, it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm older, it just feels very repetitive and darker. Although, one book I'm reading is called Cool Illusions by Margie Austin. It definitely it feels very nostalgic, like old YA to me. But other than that, like, I feel like the language has gotten really stylized to the point where it's too much for me. Like, everything is short sentences and repetitive, like, for poetic effect, that I'm just like, oh my god. Like, can you just tell the story? I don't need all this pretty language. Like, it's getting in the way of the story. Yeah. I feel like that's a big difference. The language has gotten super stylized now. Yeah. With YA. Yeah, it is different. Now I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's very different.
I agree with what you said about how the books you have now you didn't have as a teenager and you wish you did. Like, so many of the YA books that I read, and like you said, most of them are indie published. A lot of the ones that I like are YA now, and I think it's not that nobody had written those stories at that time, but nobody published them at that time. And now they're, everywhere. And as far as like traditionally published YA, I don't know the last time I read a traditionally published YA book. It's been years. But from what I gather, I almost feel like there's no right and wrong isn't clear. It's everything is a gray. Everything is a gray area, and everything is like, oh, we're kind of bending this rule and bending that rule, and we're blurring all the lines, kind of thing, which I'm not a fan of myself personally.
Yeah, and the reason I don't read a whole lot of traditionally published YA is I feel like I have to be careful because I have read YA books before where they have full-on descriptive sex scenes in YA book, and I personally don't want to read that. Like, myself as an adult, I'm like, well, I'm just hesitant about picking up YA books because I don't know what's going to be in them. And it makes me sad because I wish I could just like let my daughters run loose in the library, but I I don't know, whether I really should or not, if it's like how it is today.
Yeah.
Which makes me sad, because I think having that freedom as a teenager is really nice. Just to read whatever I wanted to read. But I also look back and I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't read that. I wish I hadn't read that. So.
Yeah. Like if somebody could have kind of censored it a little bit for you, then it would have been better for your brain. Yeah.
And what I read wasn't even that bad, too.
No.
Compared to what they have today.
What amazes me is like any parents out there, please do what my mom did, where if she wasn't sure, she would read the book first so that she knew if it was for me. Do that for your kids, because like there were people on the internet when I was trying to figure out how appropriate Game of Thrones was years ago. There were people who let their 13-year-old read Game of Thrones. 13. And I also looked up, I think it was Throne of Glass, the series, and somebody let their 13-year-old read that too. And I was like, and I looked up to see how appropriate it was, and I was like, 13-year-olds reading this? I'm like, parents, what are you doing? Like, look at the book before you let your kid look at it. Which, I mean, it's unfortunate that you have to be diligent, parents, because you never know what's in there.
I agree. I cannot imagine reading Game of Thrones at 13. Because, like, even as an adult, like, I want to finish the series in that it's just really good story. I want to know what happens. But I have to take it so slow. And this is probably why I shouldn't read it, honestly. So maybe I won't finish it. But I'll be reading it. It just makes my skin crawl. Because it's that morally gray thing. So it's not only like there's violence and sexual stuff in it, the way they treat it is just so depressing and like really disgusting at times. So I'll be reading it and I'll just be like,
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's such a good story, because it is. He's a great writer, but I'll read like one book at a time, then I have to go 6 months before I pick up another one, because it's just really hard to get over. So I can't imagine like a 13-year-old reading that. Like, I hope that they're not totally disturbed, because I think that would have really upset me.
Yeah,
that would have really upset me.
Yeah, I know. It's a huge show for good reason, because fantasy is hard to find, and then really good storytelling in fantasy is hard to find. And I knew from the get-go I was never gonna be able to watch the show personally, because I don't. One thing I don't do well with aggressive violence, and then also the crude sexualness. I was just like, nope, I'm not gonna be able to do this. But I was so interested in the storyline that I looked up the synopsis of every single episode, like the detailed synopsis, to find out what happens to every single character throughout the series. So I know everything that happens, but I didn't have to read. Like, that's what I do sometimes for books that I'm fascinated by, but I know I can't, like, the content I can't do. I just look up what happens. And okay, my curiosity is satiated. I'm good.
Yeah, because that's one show. I mean, you can't just like fast forward through it. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be fast forwarding through most of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I remember when I was young, we watched The Pillars of the Earth TV series, and I was like a young teenager. I was like 13 or 14, and I was so disturbed by it. Like, it was just very disturbing for me. So I can't imagine like being 13 and reading Game of Thrones, because it's the same kind of vibe. Actually, I really think that the author must have read Pillars of the Earth, because it seems very similar to me. It's like all political, and then they have like weird stuff in it. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. Like, I watched Black Hawk Down when I was like 16, and I sat there crying and shaking the entire movie, because I was so like, it was so intense. I just couldn't I don't do well with intense stuff. I just handle it. So I'm like, there's no way that I could handle Game of Thrones, because I'm pretty sure it's like 5 times worse to just 2 hours of Black Hawk Down. So
and that's the thing. Like, some people, I don't know, and I wonder if it's like a personality thing or just like what you're exposed to. Because I feel like some people are just very sensitive readers, and we just don't like really disturbing stuff. And sometimes I wonder if it's like, are we born like that, or is it people who are not sensitive were just exposed to things as kids, which I think is sad. Like, if that's the case, like, that makes me kind of sad.
Yeah. I got to think it has to do a little bit with how you're raised, because my brother and I were both raised not totally sheltered, but more on the sheltered side. And even him, like, he's been exposed to more as an adult than I have, because he is more curious than I am. And I'm like, nope, thank you.
Yeah.
but even him, he doesn't like scary movies. He doesn't like really nasty, gory, icky stuff. Like, he's watched Game of Thrones, but that's like his limit. And he didn't enjoy. So I'm like, I have to imagine that to some extent it does have to do with how much you've been of how much you can handle.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it could go both ways too, because I think people who have been exposed to really bad stuff in real life, like, they know that it's actually awful. Like, other people might be like, oh, it's fun, because to them it's entertaining, because they've never really gone through anything. Like, I mean, my fiance, he, like, if we watch something and, like, the character's storyline is really toxic, or, like, there's toxic relationships, just, like, he has had enough, like, experiences in his adult life. He's like, I don't want to watch stuff about toxic people. You know, like, I'm moved on from, like, that part of my life. It's over. I'm not dealing with these kind of people anymore, and he just wants nothing to do with it. And same with me, because, like, I dealt with, like, a lot of toxicity in my early adulthood, like, broken families and stuff like that, and, like, toxic relationships. And now I don't enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this just reminds me of things that I don't want to be like. I don't want to, like, be involved with that anymore, and I don't want to, like, fill my brain with it, you know?
I agree. I feel like unless it's like a cautionary tale or like a uplifting kind of thing of getting out of a situation, I don't want to just watch people be abusive toward each other. I don't find that entertaining at all.
Yeah, I think there's such a big difference between just showing it just to show it, and then having it, the ending. Like, I watched, we were really off topic now, but anyway, I watched Davy Jones and the Six show, and it is definitely, there's a lot of, I mean, drugs and alcohol and, like, all sorts of, because it's about rock stars.
Yeah.
But some people might disagree with me on this one, but I actually didn't think it was that bad, because there was at no point that I felt they were glorifying the bad behavior. It always seemed to me that they were showing that this is a lonely, awful life, and this is what happens. But they didn't. But they were, the storyline was showing it as, like, this is not the life you want, and it's easy to get into, but it's very broken and unhappy. And I thought it had, like, a really good moral at the end, and I felt like the book did too. So that's kind of, like, I feel like my limit. Like, I'll watch it because it happens. People make bad choices and people suffer and stuff, but I don't like it to be glorified. I like it to be always seen as, this is unhappy. Yeah. Like, this is not, these characters are not happy this way. And then at the end, they, like, come out of it and they settle down and they have, like, a normal family life, which is, like, what happens. Sorry if I spoiled the show for you.
And I totally agree. Like, when there's a point behind it, like, you know, like you said, showing what the consequences are actually like, that's, you know, doesn't bother me. And we're totally off topic. The thing that probably bothers me most when I'm watching things on TV is I don't like gratuitous violence, because I feel it's almost, because I almost get, like, secondhand everything for the characters. Like, I get secondhand embarrassment. I think I get secondhand, like, misery, where I'm like, I feel for them so hard that it's like, I can't watch this. But sexual assault, visually, why? Why ever? Why is it, I remember watching The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio about the bear attack, which the bear attack was bad enough. I don't know why they had to show the entire bear attack. Why? But then also to show a sexual assault scene later in the movie, and I was like, what value is this supposed to add to the movie right now? Yeah. Like, for one thing, it has nothing to do with the story, but even if it did, you could just insinuate that something had happened. I don't need to see it. I don't understand why people need to film that. I don't understand it at all. It just blows my mind.
And I think it's for people who, like, are more numbed or, like, deadened, so that they need to take for excitement. But for me, like, I feel it with it, so it affects me physically. Like, when I see violence, like, it hurts my body. Like, I'm imagining it happening to me. So, you know, and I think that's the sad fact. I think they put it in there because some people are not sensitive like that, and they like it because they aren't sensitive, so they need that, like, extra kick to, like, maybe feel something, which is sad, because I feel like everybody should be sensitive enough where, like, if they think about something happening to another person, like, it hurts them too. Yeah. And that's how it should be. It really should. But not how it is, you know.
I know. It's like when they show videos of people getting hurt, like that are funny. It depends on how hurt you are. I'll laugh. I don't find it funny when people get hurt. Like I always find those movies where I'm like, oh my gosh, are they okay? Like those funniest home video moments. Yeah. Like I'm like, okay, did somebody call the ambulance? Like that's my reaction. But apparently that's not it.
Yeah, like when people like flip over and fall on the sidewalk, I'm just like imagining that scraping of the sidewalk and like falling hard and like hitting your head. Like it hurts me.
Yeah. We are not cut out for the really graphic world of entertainment.
We're just not. That's the point of this episode.
Yeah.
I don't know, like should this even be like entitled YA books anymore or like sensitive readers unite? That might be a better title.
There we go. Yeah. I feel more on topic. Oh.
But yeah, that is our thoughts on YA books and stuff that we like reading and stuff that we do not.
Because boys, there are a lot of it.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for sticking around with us, guys.
Yeah, if you're still here, you're a super man.
But yeah, let us know if you agree with us, like what kind of stuff you like watching, or if you've read any of the books that we read as teenagers, and if we share any similar favorites, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. Bye.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it, and tune in next week for another episode. And if you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a review so that other people can find us, and we will see you in the future. Bye.